If not, the first thing we had on the agenda was just some time to reflect on how the TEC co-chair presentation to the Council Pogo Committee went. So I'll give a little bit of context. Kenzie and Hunta, the co-chairs, presented to Pogo almost 2 weeks ago on March 10th. Battled incredibly through some tech difficulties and made it happen, and lots and lots and lots of kudos to you both. And got a bunch of positive feedback from council members in the presentation, and I've been in the process of, I sent the recommendations you all had drafted to all of the council, almost all or all of the council offices in the weeks leading up to that presentation, asking for their feedback on which parts of that work they would want to take on. And I'm still in the process. I sent a bunch more emails today of following up with all the council offices to kind of ask that question again if they haven't answered and or figure out next steps in the things they'd offered to take on. This isn't something I think we'd done in the past with presentations to council, and I think it's definitely increasing the council members' engagement with the recommendations. The piece I'm still trying to figure out is like how to make sure the things folks are interested in then do move forward as policy. But having shared that context, I'm curious if anyone has any reflections on how this went. This was kind of the big project of the policy subcommittee last year, was these recommendations, and Casey isn't here today, but Z had a really, really big role in drafting them. So as we kind of think about how to move policy forward in 2021, I'd love to hear any reflections anyone has on what worked and what didn't in this process.
This is Billy. Having not drafted them or like been in the process of that, like being relatively new to the council, I guess I don't have much of an opinion on this, but what was the positive feedback, I guess, from council, from the presentation, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Kenzie, do you want to share that or do you want me to?
You know, I left the call when we were getting most of the positive feedback, so I would love to hear as well.
I forgot that it was running so late that you had to leave while they were all giving feedback. Thank you for reminding me. I would say it was primarily CVP Jenkins and Councilmember Cunningham kind of naming like all of the work the TEC has done over the past few years and thanking you all for your commitment to continually bringing things to council and for kind of like the breadth of what the recommendations covered. And then Councilmember Ellison spoke as well. I think Councilmember Cunningham made a very clear point about like, I'm really grateful for what you all did. I want to make sure my cis counterparts on the council are listening to and heard these recommendations. This can't only be on the trans folks. Councilmember Gordon wrote in the chat, like, I hear them, and then got called on when he wasn't actually trying to make a comment and was just trying to say that, and it was beautifully awkward. And then Councilmember Ellison also just, I think, kind of like applauded the breadth of the recommendations and like how thorough they were. So none of the feedback was a very specific, like, I'm so glad you recommended this and we're going to do it, but definitely a naming of all the work the TEC has done, particularly from those three council members. Does anyone have other reflections or thoughts on that? I think I will share one thing I'm reflecting on because I would love to hear your all's feedback on it, but I think one of the things I'm thinking about is it feels clear that presentations to council are most effective when they are about things that are already going on, or when they are very small and specific. You've already gotten council member buy-in on them, and then the council member who's already bought in can be like, look, they spelled out exactly how to do this. Now we'll take action on it. And I think we tried to hit the intersection of that this year. It was broad because there were a lot of things you all had developed recommendations around, but tried to build council member buy-in with individual council members in advance in the hopes that they would pick up things and move them forward. And a number have committed to that. And I think the question will be following up and figuring out how to make that happen. And related to that, like many of the recommendations were things that I tried to start taking action on before you all even presented the recommendations, tried to start following up with the relevant departments. And so the recommendation was then partially like, council members, can you please continue to encourage these departments to do this thing? Because it's become clear to me over the past few years that just asking council members to tell department staff to do something is not always effective, and we might as well just go start doing the thing with the department staff if possible. All of that to say, this is the year where we've done the most like pre-action on the recommendations and or one-on-ones with council members. But even still, there was only one council member that actual TEC members met with, as opposed to a couple more that I had one-on-ones with. And I'm curious if there are ways that you all would want us to be doing more of that, or like if folks would want to be meeting with council members themselves. I know, Kenzie, you had the experience of meeting with council member Ellison, since he technically chairs the subcommittee of POGO that you all were presenting to. I think as I continue to think through how to make this more effective, I would love to hear thoughts from you on how you want to see us doing that or how you want to be involved in that. Or does anyone have any questions for me on that question? Because I'm seeing that I asked something that doesn't feel answerable. If not, we can also try to continue doing things this year the way we did them last year and in the beginning of this year. And we can move on to kind of the next updates in the agenda, if that feels good to folks. Can I get a kind of, yeah.
Oh yeah, I will just say before we like move on to the next point, I think it would be helpful if Casey were here. Yeah, to give that feedback, because I know that Z like literally helped build the like recommendations document. So I'm just wondering if like they would have more feedback in this particular area.
I'm also happy to follow up with here and try to get feedback and see if Z has anything in particular. Does anyone have anything else before we move on to updates? If not, the updates I have are relatively quick. In terms of the transforming community safety work, I know you all have been following specifically the work around the mental health crisis response team that's being funded. And last time we talked, the request for proposals for organizations who could kind of staff that was being drafted. At this point, that request for proposals has gone out. I forget exactly when it closes, I think pretty soon. And then they will be evaluating those organizations. And definitely, I remember you all having pretty positive feedback on like the questions that were asked in there and the ways those were framed around trauma, like folks knowing how to respond to trauma, folks being supported in the trauma they would experience in the job, cultural competency, and a number of other things. I also know that it's an intention that at the end of 2021, since this is a pilot program, the work gets really clearly evaluated for like, okay, where did we succeed and where were there still gaps? So that is where that's at right now. It is not staffed, but the request for proposals is out and will be evaluated soon. I don't have any other updates on the city's like transforming community safety work more generally. Does anyone have any questions on any of that?
Do we know when, like where we are in the timeline, I guess, like when we're going to be rolling out everything?
I don't, and the website is a project to search, so I'm not going to try to look it up right now, but I can definitely follow up with that information when I send the minutes. And I probably will have to follow up with staff because I don't actually know that the timeline of like when they're planning on making a decision and then how long it'll be between that and when it's up and running is public, but I can definitely follow up with staff and ask that. And I'll let you all know. Does anyone have any other questions on that? Sorry, someone was calling me. If not, I can go into updates around housing policy. I also don't have a ton there. I know that the maximum occupancy ordinance definition of family situation that we talked about in TEC meetings, essentially turning the definition of family in our like city housing ordinances into just whoever you live with, so that you could be seen as over the maximum occupancy if you actually had more people than were safe for the space, but not because you had too many people who were unrelated to each other. That change is in the process of going through council in action. There's like no big anything there. Beyond that, I don't think any other of the big housing policy things we've talked about in TEC meetings have changed in the last few weeks. Still in the process of getting rent stabilization on the ballot, still in the process of tenant opportunity to purchase. All of the other things we've talked about are still in process. Does anyone have any housing related questions or things that would be useful for me to look into more detail on, even if they're things we haven't talked about before? If not, I can also provide an update. I'm not going to share a like really detailed update about the Decrim Coalition decriminalization of sex work campaign on this call right now, but can send more information with the minutes. But I attended the first Decrim Coalition meeting, and they're working on coalition building in order to move towards repealing the loitering ordinance, which is already something that some council members are supportive of. There's going to be a point when it's necessary, obviously, to get all council members on board, and that will probably be a key role for the TEC, is liaising with council members somewhat. Another thing, and I'm going to pull up this email real quickly, so give me one moment, but another thing that I talked about with some of the folks from the coalition is they are curious to have the TEC bring in more of a conversation around that awful bill at the state level that would criminalize trans kids, specifically trans girls in athletics, and want to know more about that and want to see if there are ways that they can respond to that as well. And I'm trying to get more clarity from them on what exactly they're looking for, since that's a state level conversation and this is a city level conversation right now. But I would say if anyone has been tracking that more or following that legislation and has like more detail on it than the somewhat high level understanding I know I have personally, I'd love to connect. And or if you want to be someone who's doing a little bit more of that research, which I know is an emotionally intense ask, so I'm not asking anyone to do that unless you want to. But if you want to be someone who's following that a little bit more and bringing that back to the Decrim Coalition space, that's also an ask that exists. Does anyone have any questions, reflections, thoughts on any of that? And who wants to be, or who would want to attend those meetings if possible, so that I can forward you calendar invites when I get them, if you're not already on their list?
Yeah, I'd like to go to those meetings. I missed the last one. I don't think I had an invite, or I couldn't find the invite, so definitely put me on the list, please.
Sweet, and I see Jay in the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Does anyone have any more questions or reflections on that work? I think they're hoping to move pretty quickly. So my guess is by the next meeting, I'll have a lot more information. The next policy meeting, I'll have a lot more information for you all on potential roles in terms of connecting to council members. If not, the last thing I have here, and the agenda is basically just built on the priorities that you all identified at the beginning of the year. And so the last thing is the trans panic defense. I know we talked in the last TEC meeting about drafting a letter to state legislators, excuse me. Where is that at? Have folks, is that a thing that you're still interested in and working on?
This is Kaylin. I think for my part, I was hoping to find time to put something together and send it out to folks who are interested, but I just haven't been able to find the time and also energy for this particular thing. And so unless I missed communication from the rest of the group who is interested in working on it, I'm not sure we have anything yet. And so we're just waiting to put something together and then maybe talk about it and then, you know, actually send it off. I also don't know when any of this is supposed to be like brought up in committee or anything like that. And so just kind of still very high level, I guess.
That totally makes sense, and no worries at all about not having the capacity to do it. I can definitely follow up with our intergovernmental relations staff who know how to track stuff at the state better than I do, and get a sense of the timeline in terms of when this is going into committee, if that would be helpful for you all. I don't think I have the capacity to offer to start a draft, realistically, unfortunately, otherwise I would. But if there are other ways I can support, I'm happy to, and I definitely can get a sense of timeline for you all. Is there any other information that would be useful for me to get? I will also just mention to the intergovernmental relations staff that you all are working on a letter in case they have any feedback on like framing or anything else. If not, that's all I've got in terms of updates, because most of these things haven't moved a ton since the last time we talked. I'm curious if anyone has any questions, reflections, other things they want to check in about, things they know are going on at the city that they want to see the TEC making a statement about, etc.
This is Billy. I'm wondering if when you talk to the intergovernmental relations group, they might have a template, like a pretty basic template, like fill-in wise, that might be easier for folks if we can have it on like some platform where we can like add in or kind of collectively make a document. That might be helpful. I know some people do that, and they might not, but that was just when you speak to them, they might offer that up.
Yeah, I can totally ask, and or if there's anywhere else that might have one, I'm happy to try to surface that for you all. Does anyone have any other questions, thoughts, other things they want to check in about or work on?
I want to shout out our TEC gathering in April. I think it's the 14th. 14th, Wednesday at 5 p.m. Mark your calendars, and I want to see everybody. So, and also respond to Track's email if you can provide anything. So, or want to, or have a game or whatever. So, yeah, that's all.
Ooh, I have one other question for you all, actually, that just occurred to me. We are starting summit planning this week, despite the fact that it probably will still snow another few times between now and the summit. And I know in the past, I hate that fact, but I know in the past, one of the things we've tried to use the summit for is to kind of provide programming that supports trans residents in feeling like they know how to influence and shape city policy. And that can look a lot of different ways. We once almost had, but didn't end up having, a workshop around like how to testify to city council. We've definitely, like, there's been a TEC listening session most years, in fact, as another example. And I think this can look a lot of other ways we haven't even thought of yet. And so I'm curious if anyone has any initial thoughts on like policy related programming, resources, etc., that you would want to see happening at the summit. It does not need to include that by any means, but it can. Amir, I see you with the thought.
Yeah, this is so exciting. This is sort of what I've been working on in my internships, etc. And what I've been imagining further about the Stonewall History Project is how we connect stories to policy. I'm working on a project right now I'm working on at my internship. I'm working with Local Voices Network. They've recorded some community dialogues that sort of pull out key areas key concerns, key issues that are being sort of expressed, these stories that are sort of relating to the different concerns that people experience around equitable economy. And we have built a policy database, so we're connecting those stories to a policy database, which will allow us to sort of create an agenda and push it forward, you know, to our community to be adopted across several organizations, platforms, on the ground organizers, et cetera, say this is how we get to a well-being economy. So just that whole, how are we really listening, how do we understand community as policymakers, you know, based on their sort of stories, their lived experiences, and their demands. So I don't know, you know, who to collaborate, who does that work, et cetera, but that's something I'm sort of in my, you know, formulating now in my work.
I love that. I also can't fully wrap my head around how to make that happen, but I wrote as much of that down as I could capture, and I'm curious if anyone else has thoughts, and I can also like bring that to summit planning conversations, etc. Jay, not to totally put you on the spot, but you look like you at least have reactions to that. And I'm curious if you have like thoughts of how you'd want to see that happen, or if that's just like, yes, please.
I'm a reactive person, so yeah, that's why I turned my camera on because I can't hide it. But I was writing down as much of that as well. I don't know if I have any input yet, but I would love to connect with you, Amir, and learn more about that. And my coworker Nadia is on the call. We definitely love to, yeah, cool.
Track, can you remind me, when is the summit taking place?
It is generally in the fall, September, or maybe early October. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts in terms of like policy related programming at the summit? And or anything else that you want to make sure we discuss in our first summit planning committee meeting this week?
I think it's a great idea that you're bringing that into it. I think it's really important. Not a lot of people have an understanding of how any of this stuff works, you know, whether it's policy or even local politics broadly. I think it's such an opportunity, you know, to help promote engagement locally, civically, because it's just not really ever accessible, especially to the LGBT plus community. And it's overwhelming, it's intimidating, you know, and how do you make it not scary?
This is Jay. Just kind of picking up off of what you just said. I guess I should do like a quick introduction because this is the first time I've been in one of these calls. My name is Jay Spells. I work with Family Tree Clinic. I'm with the community engagement department. So that is exactly why I'm here, and Nadia is here as well, just to kind of connect with you all and have a better and more clear understanding of how policy is working, how these bills are getting pushed through, and see if we can kind of connect the dots. I'm realizing that I think the decrim coalition that Track mentioned earlier, we might have a connection to SWAP, who's been doing a lot of that work. Yeah, we meet with them somewhat regularly, so I can see what kind of information we can kind of gain and share. So yeah, really glad to be here.
Thanks for being here, Jay and Nadia. It's good to have you here. Does anyone else have anything? And as always, if you have a comment you'd rather not share out loud, you can also put it in the chat or feel free to send me an email later. But if no one has anything, we can wrap up a little early. I will send out minutes and they'll be posted on the city's LIMS website as well. And thank you everyone so much for being here. Hopefully by next month, there will be more of some of these policy pieces that are moving. But I'll follow up with you in between if there's any like more immediate actions that are useful to take. Yeah.
Are you keeping track of House File 358?
I am not tracking state stuff really. I'm only tracking city stuff. Sorry.
Okay. No, thanks.
What is House File 358? I'm guessing I should know.
Yeah, It's a comprehensive sex ed bill that we're pushing to be in schools. I can maybe send an email of some links to you, and then you can share it with anyone who might be interested in knowing more about comprehensive sex ed bill that's kind of being worked through right now.
Sweet, thank you. I can also, when I follow up with intergovernmental relations, that feels aligned with the content we just added to our like city's legislative agenda for our city lobbyists, and so I can make sure that they're tracking it as well and seeing that alignment. And yeah, that is a thing we were able to do because the city has lobbyists at the state level. So like we were pushing on the panic defense bill, for example, and against some of the sports legislation. So please always feel free to loop me in about state stuff that I clearly am not keeping on top of, but would be useful for the city to be following so that we can make sure our legislative agenda reflects it and our lobbyists know. Amir.
Can y'all send me your legislative agenda? Is it somewhere so I could read it? Thank you.
I will send it out with the minutes. It is a long document.
Okay.
But
it's okay. That's good.
No one has anything else. Thank you all so much for being here. As always, please reach out with whatever, email, text, call, whatever is best for you. I'll see you all soon.